Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you're watching from today. I'd love to know. And if you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to like and subscribe. All right, let's jump in. The alien admiral's hands were shaking. Not from fear, but from something deeper, something colder. Fear had come and gone in the first hour of battle. What remained now was the heavy silence of knowing the impossible had happened. His war robes, once symbols of rank and honor, were torn and burned, dark with soot and the blood of others. The command deck around him groaned, under the weight of smoke and ruin. The stars beyond the shattered view screen were gone, replaced by a drifting graveyard of broken ships. Fires burned across the hulls of fallen flagships, his flagships, and floating through it all, untouched, uncaring, was a single human warship. It was small, ugly, looked more like a construction barge than a weapon of war, but it was still here, still moving, and every broken piece of debris around it, every shattered cruiser, every silenced broadcast whispered the same truth. This ship hadn't just survived, it had spoken. "Bring up its battle record," the admiral ordered, his voice dry like ash. One of the few surviving bridge officers hesitated, his green skin pale and slick with fear. "Sir, that ship wasn't supposed to exist. We had no data. It's not in any of our charts." "I didn't ask where it came from," the admiral growled, turning slowly toward the cracked screen. "I asked what it did." The logs played in fragments, chaotic bursts of static and screams, flashes of weapons fire, and one recurring shape in the center of it all: the warship. It didn't fight like theirs. It didn't fire in clean lines or follow the rhythm of command. It moved like a living thing, twisting and diving, crashing through targets that should have stopped it. At one point, it rammed directly into a power core, tearing itself apart and still managing to take half a fleet with it. And through the fire, through the wreckage, someone inside that ship had kept broadcasting. A voice, human, calm, clear. "We are not here to conquer. We are not here to talk. We are the answer. And this," the voice said, as flames danced across the last feed, "is how we speak." The recording ended. The silence returned. The human ship was still out there, slowly circling the ruins. No shields, no backup, just scars and firelight and something terrifyingly deliberate. It hadn't come to win. It had come to send a message. And the message was fire. The bridge stank of ozone and burnt flesh. Somewhere in the lower decks, an exposed coolant line hissed quietly, a reminder that the ship, this once mighty vessel, was dying by inches. Admiral Kieran Velrock stood motionless, eyes fixed on the distant shape of the human warship. He didn't blink, didn't speak. He just watched it drift like a ghost through the ruins of what had once been the pride of the Threxan Dominion. Around him, the survivors barely functioned. Officers who once barked orders now whispered updates in shaky voices. Medics moved among the fallen without urgency. They knew there was no help coming. They had fielded an armada so vast it had stretched the skies of 3 systems. Their strategy was flawless. Their simulations had promised victory in hours. Instead, they'd been shattered in minutes. And that ship, that thing, had never stopped broadcasting. Velrock forced himself to speak, though his throat felt like it was filled with glass. "How many ships did we lose?" The tactician nearest him looked up, blood smeared across one side of her face. Her mouth moved for a moment before words came. 93% of the fleet, sir. No working communication relays. No command structure. No fleet cohesion. She hesitated. They disabled everything. Velrock nodded slowly. And the humans? She swallowed. We don't know. Most of their ships were destroyed, but they didn't fight like a fleet. They fought like... Her voice broke off. She didn't finish. Like wolves. Like chaos wrapped in metal and fire. He already knew what she meant. Velrock turned back to the screen. The human ship had stopped moving. It floated above the debris of one of the Dominion's oldest war carriers, Tor Valas, a vessel over 5 kilometers long, known across 3 galaxies. Now it was just a broken husk, and the human ship rested above it like a tombstone. This was supposed to be a statement, Velrock said, not to anyone in particular. A reminder to the fringe systems of what happens when you resist. We outnumbered them 100 to 1. We had control of the sector, tactical high ground, superior tech. We spent generations preparing for this moment. No one answered. And yet... He gestured toward the ruined void beyond the screen. And yet, they had been humiliated. What made it worse wasn't just the loss. It was the message behind it. The human warship didn't come to defend territory. It didn't come to claim a throne. It came to destroy belief, to burn away the illusion of dominance, and it had succeeded. If that ship wasn't destroyed, Velrock said quietly, then we haven't just lost a battle. We've lost the war before it's even begun. He stepped down from the command platform, each movement feeling heavier than the last. A trail of ash followed his boots, where soot and blood had mixed on the deck. No alarms blared anymore. No klaxons warned them of incoming fire. The silence itself was an accusation. He remembered the briefing weeks ago, when intelligence first intercepted chatter about a human unit operating outside formal fleets. Undisciplined, one general had scoffed. Rogue cells with outdated ships and no tactical cohesion, another had said. Velrock had been cautious. He'd read too many reports from the outer colonies, strange ambushes, vanished patrols, dead outposts without signs of struggle. But no one listened. Not really. Because they were the Threxan Dominion. Because humans were fractured, primitive. Because the numbers said it couldn't happen. And now the numbers were floating in pieces across a dead sky. They didn't just win, Velrock muttered. They rewrote the rules. He passed the burned-out remains of a navigation console. An officer's hand still rested there, frozen by fire, fingers half-curled as if they were still trying to plot an escape route. The admiral couldn't look away. How do you fight an enemy that doesn't fear death? That uses their own fallen ships to block your missiles, their own wreckage to jam your comms? He paused as the lights above flickered and dimmed again. They didn't come to fight us, he said. They came to make sure no one would ever think of fighting them again. That was the real horror, not the loss. Not even the destruction of 100,000 Threxan ships. It was the certainty that if this ship, this one message wrapped in steel and fire, wasn't stopped, others would follow. More ships, more ghosts, more monsters born from the ashes of Earth. They would keep coming. Not as a fleet, not as a nation, but as a fury. And the rest of the galaxy would see it. The colonies, the rebel worlds, even Threxan loyal sectors already growing nervous. They'd see this message, and they'd understand. The Dominion wasn't untouchable. A quiet beeping pulled Velrock from his thoughts. A new signal. Audio only. No encryption. No code. He looked at the officer monitoring the console. Put it through. There was a crackle of static. Then the voice came. It was a woman's. Human. Calm. Like it was reading bedtime stories instead of eulogies. This is Commander Arlen Voss of the Vigilant Flame. To the Threxan Dominion, to anyone still alive aboard your fleet, this is not a declaration. This is not a negotiation. This is a record. She paused. You burned our cities, took our children, called it justice. Now we return the favor. Not because we want peace, not because we seek revenge, but because monsters taught us how to be monsters, and we learned quickly. Velrock clenched his jaw. The bridge crew stared at the speaker as if expecting it to bite. We're not asking you to understand, the voice continued. We're not even asking you to stop. Just remember this. You started a fire you can't control, and now the fire speaks. The signal cut. No demand. No instructions. No list of terms. Just fire. Velrock stood still for a long moment, the echoes of the message ringing in the hollow deck. He turned slowly to the comms officer. Any surviving ships? A few, she said. 24 crippled. No jump capacity, no leadership. Velrock nodded. Then the message is complete. The warship didn't need to kill us all. It only needed to show us. The bridge groaned again, metal twisting under pressure. Somewhere far below, a coolant line exploded, sending vapor hissing into a collapsing corridor. He took one last look at the human ship outside. They could have destroyed them completely, wiped every last Threxan vessel from the sector. But they didn't, because that wasn't the point. The point wasn't to kill the body. It was to poison the mind. Admiral Velrock sat in the corner of the medical bay, though no one had bothered to treat him. His wounds were internal, not the kind that bled. The room around him stank of antiseptic and burnt flesh. The survivors were few. Many lay unconscious. Others whimpered under blood-streaked bandages. The hum of failing power generators underscored every breath. No medics spoke to him. None dared ask for orders. He had been the voice of strength, the symbol of authority. Now, he was just another ghost in a field of dying echoes. His thoughts returned again and again to the image of the warship. Scarred, slow, deliberate. And the woman's voice that had carried through the black like a knife carved from ice. He remembered her tone. It wasn't hateful. It wasn't angry. It was worse. It was certain. He closed his eyes and tried to hear the silence of space. Instead, he heard screams. At first, he thought it was memory, but then the voices sharpened. Real voices. Down the corridor, another group of soldiers had been brought in. One of them, his armor fused to his skin from heat damage, was screaming unintelligibly. The medics moved like shadows, trying to sedate him. But the soldier fought back with strength that shouldn't have remained in someone so wounded. They just kept coming. The man howled. They wouldn't stop. They wanted to die. Velrock opened his eyes. The room stilled as the man was finally sedated. The screams fell into an exhausted silence, leaving behind a sound just as terrible, whimpering. From another bed, a communications officer curled into herself, her hands trembling as she stared at nothing. They smiled, she whispered, to no one in particular. They were smiling. Their ship was on fire, and the commander, she smiled. The admiral stood, slowly, carefully. Every joint ached, every breath dragged across a cracked rib. He moved past the beds, past the wounded, ignoring the ones who still wept or whispered nonsense. These weren't just injured soldiers. They were witnesses. He found a vacant operations chamber, a room that had once been a war council center. The screens were offline. The control table cracked. It didn't matter. He sat. For the first time since the battle began, he let his thoughts move freely, without the shield of command. There had been no tactical explanation. Every move the humans made defied standard military theory. They didn't target strategic outposts first. They didn't cripple fuel depots or shipyards. They hit culture, symbols, memory. They struck first at the outer ring, the massive archive station of Aloris 8, where the Dominion stored its artistic history, its public victories, its monuments to glory. They didn't just destroy it. They erased it, broadcasting its obliteration to every system still connected to the net. One ship, one pilot, a suicide dive into the station's core, detonating a blast that lit up half a quadrant. No demand, no speech, just erasure. Velrock had dismissed it at the time as terrorism, reckless, a one-off stunt. Now, he knew better. They weren't attacking to win territory. They were attacking meaning. He had reviewed the combat logs, what little survived. There had been no coordinated strategy among the humans, no obvious chain of command. Instead, they behaved like cells in a body, each one acting independently, but somehow aligned, as if guided by something deeper than orders, a single instinct. And worst of all, they didn't protect their own lives. One sequence kept replaying in his mind, a trio of human ships being surrounded by a much larger Dominion squadron. The humans had already lost shields. Their weapons were dry. There was no chance of victory. But instead of retreating, they activated fusion overrides, self-destruct sequences. The resulting explosion took out 19 Dominion cruisers. 19. They died with no hesitation. No hesitation and no panic. Velrock had zoomed in on the feed. One of the pilots, his face charred, helmet cracked, was grinning as the blast wave swallowed him. What kind of creatures smile when they burn? The admiral rubbed his eyes, trying to shake the question from his skull. It refused to leave. A tone sounded, an alert. A low, weak pulse from the remaining console in the room. He turned and saw a pending message, low priority relay data from a scouting vessel that had managed to limp to a nearby asteroid belt. He accessed it. Text only. Brief. No signature. We have intercepted another coded broadcast. Source, unknown. Human in origin. No visual. Content translated and attached below. He opened it. You thought we were fragile. You thought your numbers made you gods. But every god learns the same lesson eventually. If you bleed enough believers, even immortals fall. You trained for victory. We trained for survival. And when survival becomes your culture, you stop being afraid of loss. So tell your commanders, tell your allies, tell the ones still watching from a distance. That ship you saw, that wasn't a weapon. That was a warning. Velrock let the words hang in the room. His eyes scanned them again, slower this time. That ship wasn't a weapon. It was a warning. He stood, moving to the cracked view screen at the edge of the room. Beyond the atmosphere field, the human vessel still floated. It hadn't left, hadn't moved in hours. It just hovered above the dead, like a marker. Or a gravestone. A pulse of green light shimmered on the outer edge of the ship's hull. It was signaling again, broadcasting. Not in human language, not in words. Just a pulse, regular, timed, constant. "What's it saying?" Velrock whispered. He didn't expect an answer. But deep down, part of him understood. It was saying, "We're still here." It was saying, "You're not safe." It was saying, "This is only the beginning." And somewhere, not far enough away, more signals were waking up. More ships, more messages, more fire. The pulse from the warship continued for 3 more hours, steady, deliberate, relentless. A heartbeat in the dark. The damaged Dominion vessel that still housed Admiral Velrock no longer tried to decipher it. They couldn't. Their systems were too damaged, their linguists dead or burned out from the onslaught. But the rhythm of the signal had been enough to set the crew on edge. One comms officer had quietly removed her earpiece, claiming the sound was getting into her bones. Another had locked himself in the auxiliary control room and wouldn't come out. Velrock hadn't moved from the broken viewport. He barely registered the low hum of the consoles or the flickering emergency lights. His gaze remained locked on the drifting human vessel, the message that refused to leave. His thoughts spiraled with it, again and again. They should have finished them. They had the chance. The humans had surrounded the Dominion fleet from 3 vectors, driven them into a cluster trap, and then stopped, left them alive. Why? Why leave survivors unless the survivors were the message? That's when the second broadcast began. The first sign was silence, not technical failure, but that eerie, deliberate stillness that came before an ambush. Every Dominion comm frequency, including private encrypted lines, went dead. Not jammed, not blocked. Quieted. Then, just as the bridge crew began scrambling for diagnostics, the overhead speakers crackled to life. No encryption, no access permissions, just presence, as if the human voice had always been there, waiting to be heard. "Admiral Velrock," came the voice, female, mid-range, clipped, calm. He stiffened. "This is Commander Lyra Rani, Earth Resistance Command. I don't know if you remember my name, but I remember yours. I remember your speech on the anniversary of the fall of Vega 6. I remember how proud you sounded when you said the cries of our colonies were necessary echoes of progress." Her voice was clear, unfaltering. It didn't rise. It didn't tremble. You burned cities that had no military. You executed prisoners on public feeds. You sterilized biospheres because our planets were resource inefficient. You called it victory. One of Velrock's aides looked toward him, unsure whether to try and cut the feed. Velrock raised a hand. "Let it play." "But I'm not here to scream," Rane continued. "I'm not here to threaten. I'm here to teach." A pause. Then, the sound of something else played beneath her voice. Not music. Not static. Children. Laughing. Then coughing. Then screaming. A looped recording. Velrock felt his stomach twist. "This is from the refugee barge Sierra 22, intercepted and destroyed by your strike teams during the Genra Pass massacre. No weapons on board, no armor, Just civilians trying to escape a planet you were strip mining. You told your people it was a terrorist cell. She let the sounds play for another 20 seconds, just long enough to grind against the crew's nerves. Then silence again. You think we're angry, Admiral? She said, her voice colder now. You think this is fury? Another pause. It's not. It's discipline. Velrock clenched the edge of the console so hard his knuckles cracked. The voice was in his ship, in his skin. She wasn't trying to demoralize them anymore. She was doing something far more dangerous. She was writing history. We learned from every strike you made, every atrocity. You turned us into students. You made the mistake of thinking we were too weak to retaliate. Her voice sharpened now, every word clean and final. You didn't just fight a war, Admiral. You taught a generation how to hate properly. The comms officer turned, pale-faced. Sir, the transmission. It's being duplicated. Every Dominion ship with a functioning receiver is playing it now. What? Velrock snapped. The officer nodded, her hands trembling. Even non-military channels. It's going across civilian frequencies, colony relays, high command encryption, everywhere. A systemic hijack, not a broadcast, a takeover. Velrock turned slowly back to the view screen. The human warship was still there, unmoving. But now it wasn't alone. Dots blinked into view along the far edge of the field, small signatures, fast, unarmed, transmitters, not warships, stealth drones. Dozens of them scattered through the debris like seeds. They weren't here to fight. They were here to deliver. The ship outside your window, Ronnie continued, is not a weapon. It's a signal tower. Every Dominion world that's watching this now, they're not seeing your orders. They're seeing your consequences. Someone in the back of the bridge gagged. No one looked. No one moved. The ship had fallen quiet, not from discipline, but paralysis. She didn't have to, he said. That was the point. There were no negotiations, no treaties, no demands, because they weren't fighting for land anymore. They were fighting for memory, for message, and the warship outside, still broadcasting its steady pulse through the corpse field of a once proud fleet, was the monument. Every second it remained was another whisper sent into the void. We are still here. You can't silence us. Velrock turned his head to the nearest officer. How many Dominion systems are within relay range of this ship? The officer hesitated. 9 major colonies, 31 minor, 2 high-value industrial moons. Velrock stared at the readout. His eyes burned from smoke and fatigue. They'll all hear it, he said. Every one of them. The war wasn't over. The killing might have paused, but the war, the real war, was only just beginning. And humanity had already taken control of the story. The story of the Threxan Dominion was no longer being told by its victors. It was being rewritten by its survivors. In the days that followed, the signal from the human warship pulsed steadily into the dark, picked up by relay stations, private satellites, and even black market comms. The message wasn't just tactical anymore. It had become cultural, political, a virus that infected certainty. On border worlds, Dominion governors began facing riots and power shortages. Military patrols were met not with fear, but with defiance. In some cities, statues of past admirals were pulled down in the night. And always, That same phrase appeared in red paint or carved into walls. The message was fire. Inside the crippled Dominion command ship, Admiral Velrock no longer issued orders. He no longer tried to reclaim control. The command structure had collapsed under its own silence. High command had gone dark. Emergency channels flickered to life only to relay more bad news. Desertions, resource thefts, command defections. One fleet attempted to regroup at a safe harbor in the Marnis system, only to arrive and find the entire sector already flying resistance flags. The Dominion hadn't just lost a battle. It had lost the story. And without that, power meant nothing. One morning, if you could call it morning, in space, Velrock was alone in the auxiliary chamber, staring out at the debris field. The human warship was still there, silent now. The pulsing had stopped the night before, but it hadn't left. It just hovered, still and watching, like it was waiting for something. He hadn't slept. He didn't want to. Sleep brought dreams. Dreams brought the sound of screaming children and the smell of smoke and hot metal. In those dreams, he was always standing at a podium, giving speeches to cheering crowds. But when he looked down, his hands were soaked in blood, and his voice came out inhuman. He'd killed thousands without touching a weapon, and now the ghosts spoke his language. Behind him, the door hissed open. A junior officer stepped in, one of the last left. Her uniform was half torn, her left eye bandaged. She didn't salute. No one did anymore. "Sir," she said, voice small. "Incoming message. Not broadcast. Direct line. From the human ship." Velrock didn't react. "They're asking for you. Only you." A beat of silence passed, then another. Finally, he stood. The command center was mostly dark now. Only a few panels still had power. When the message began, it didn't come with a fanfare. No bright lights, no threats. Just a face. Commander Lyra Rane. Alive. Unchanged. She looked straight at him. No smile. No fury. Just a woman who had survived enough war to know that silence could cut deeper than swords. "Admiral Velrock," she said, "you don't know me, but you know what we are now." He said nothing. She continued, "This ship behind me, it was a freighter once, carried ore from a dying moon back to Earth. It wasn't supposed to survive a war, but it did, because we made it, because we chose to turn it into something more." She looked over her shoulder briefly, then back. "Everything we built into the ship, every scar, every fire trail, every name carved into the hull, it's all memory. You turned our worlds into tombs, so we turned this vessel into a grave that carries every single one of them." She leaned forward slightly. "You need to understand something. This ship wasn't the message." She paused. Her eyes burned like twin embers in the dark. "You were." The screen blinked off. No more words, no demands, no deals. Velrock stood frozen. He understood now. They hadn't let him live because they were merciful. They let him live because he had to watch, because he had to carry it, because he was the story now, the monster they had risen to destroy, the name their children would spit when they told of the war. He was the thing they had burned, and the ashes were just beginning to spread. He turned toward the viewport one last time. The human warship began to move, slowly rotating its scarred hull until the forward array faced him. A final pulse blinked across its comm relay. Then it jumped. Gone. Just like that. No army, no orders. Just a whisper of fire through the void. Velrock stayed at the glass for a long while. Behind him, the ship creaked and cracked like a dying beast, and somewhere down below, someone cried out for help that would never come. He didn't turn, didn't speak, because somewhere deep in the bones of what was once the greatest empire in the stars, something had broken, and it would never heal.